My friends, in 48 hours, 3 men from the Iranian regime said almost the same thing, each in their own way, and none of them are from the opposition. Just to make this very clear, one is the president of the country, the other is the president of the parliament, and the third is a former president who governed for 8 years. In other words, the top figures in that regime all saying almost the same thing within 48 hours. I'm going to tell you exactly what each of them is saying, and when you hear all three in sequence, you'll understand that that's not diplomacy. It's a crack showing up in the wall. And I'm also going to show you why this is coming out of their mouths now, and not at the beginning of the war. The answer lies in a stretch of water that we're looking at right now, which the regime swore was theirs, and the numbers that came out today show who's really in charge of that area. In this live stream, I'm also going to bring you an interview with an American envoy that was very poorly received here in Israel and was released today, and that contradicts our version about the attack in Syria. Remember the attack in Syria against a base? I'm also going to bring you the full interview here with what he said and with the response from the other side, because here you always get both sides. And at the end, I saved 2 pieces here that show the Iranian axis falling apart outside of Iran. One of them happened in Baghdad, and the other is a remark made today in Damascus, which closes a door that has been open for 50 years. Live from Israel, right from where everything happens, organizing as always the chaos of information here for you. Shavua Tov, have a good week everyone. Local time is 12:38 a.m. So leave a thumbs up now, right at the start, so you don't forget to do it later. Check if your subscription is still active and turn on the notification bell, because that's what lets you know when I go live in the middle of a major shift here in the Middle East. Let's go to the 3 statements in the order they were released. The president of Iran said that the war needs to end at some point and that it would be best if it ended today. He said that, guys, and added that they are in a position of strength and honor and that the whole world has recognized their victory. And then came the Speaker of Parliament, who was once the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Air Force, Galibaf. And he said that it doesn't matter how much military power they have. If those in power are hungry, if the people are hungry, and if there is no money circulating and the economy isn't growing, the country can't sustain itself. Look at what he's saying, guys. Who would have expected Galibaf to say that? And he added that security and the economy depend on each other, and that security can't stand without the economy behind it. And today, the former president, Mohammad Khatami, who governed the country for 8 years and is still one of the most respected voices in the reformist camp, stepped in. And Khatami warned that if Iran misses the opportunity presented by the Memorandum of Understanding, remember the 60-day memorandum? Opened up by the 60-day Memorandum of Understanding, the country could face unusual hardship. And he concluded by saying that he hopes this time the chance won't be wasted, like so many others were in the past, because if this one is lost too, the threats will be even more serious. These 3 statements, my friends, were not made for an external audience. It wasn't a speech aimed at the United States, it was made for the people inside Iran. The regime needs to prepare its own population for an agreement that it itself used to call a surrender months ago or a few weeks ago, and that's why the president of Iran asks for the end of the war, and in the same sentence, he says that the world has recognized Iran's victory. No one who is winning asks to end it today. Do you agree? Everyone agrees with that. And now, why did these 3 statements all come out in the same week? Because the leverage that supported the narrative broke. And I'm going to show you this with numbers. And they already know this much better than anyone. A maritime tracking company released a survey of the last 2 weeks here in the strait you're seeing, the Strait of Hormuz. More than 80 crossings took the route that runs right along the coast of Oman. This route that's blinking there, I marked it here on the ship so you can see exactly where this route is. And this is exactly the route that Iran doesn't control and that the regime has banned the use of. Yesterday we had reports of shots fired at or toward Hormuz. And today there were reports of shots again, but they didn't manage to hit anything at all. And a month ago, practically no ship would pass through this region. And the one who summed up the situation was the head of crude oil analysis at Kepler, which is the company that does this kind of tracking by satellite and transponder. And the summary he gave was the following. It seems more and more that Iran has lost, at least in part, control of the strait. And on the American side, the Secretary of Energy put his numbers on the table, saying that on Tuesday, the US Navy helped move more than 15 million barrels of oil and derivatives through the strait. He said that, adding what goes out through pipelines, the total that left the region reached nearly 20 million barrels. And he said that the average over the last 7 days is above 8 million barrels per day. And he also ended with a bit of propaganda that was clearly aimed, leaving no doubt, he said. Thanks to the US Navy, oil continues to cross the strait. And now I need to do something here that almost nobody does, which is to compare these numbers with what I gave you yesterday. Yesterday I brought you a report here that mentioned 7 cargo ships in a single day, and that Gulf traffic was a quarter of what it used to be. And today I bring you here 15 million barrels in 1 day, and 80% of the crossings on that route. It seems like a contradiction, but it's not, because 3 different things are being measured. One thing is to count how many cargo ships enter and leave the Gulf, and that number is very low. Another is to count how many barrels of oil cross, and that number has gone up because the protected convoy seems to be working, according to this information that's also coming from the American media. And the third question is which side of the strait they pass through, and the answer is on the Oman side, this side here. Look, this side of Oman. I'll mark this other little ship here so you can understand that it's on this side that they're passing, okay? So it's far from Iran. So put those 3 together and that's the picture. Regular trade is still strangled, oil is flowing again, and who decides which way it leaves is no longer Tehran. Just so you have a reference, before this campaign started, about 23 million barrels a day passed through there, including Iranian oil. And today it's about a third less. That's it, just that. And not a single drop of Iranian oil, nothing at all, is coming out of Iran. And there's a detail that explains all of this better than any speech. According to market analysts, the ship owners simply refused to pay the fee that Iran wanted to charge to let them pass. And they preferred the longer route with American escort overhead. The escort is still happening. Just look here. The planes are fighter jets providing escort in this region, doing that same movement as always, working here to maintain security and order in this region of the strait near Oman. Man, these planes spend the whole day there, guys, flying around the clock in this region. In other words, that toll the regime charged in the spring, it's over. It wasn't an agreement. It wasn't any UN resolution, guys. This time, it wasn't a UN resolution. It wasn't negotiation either. It was the client, the ship itself, turning its back on Iran. If this explanation is helping you understand what the headline doesn't tell you, give it a thumbs up now. It only takes a second, guys, so hit the like button right now and let's cut straight to it. As for the American president, who talked about this yesterday in typical Trump fashion, as always, Trump being Trump, he said he considers the Strait of Hormuz American territory. He mentioned this once again. Repeating this and everything in every kind of recording or video, every interview he gives, he says it's American territory. And about the regime, he said they have no money, no navy, no air force, and that's true. Guys, they don't have money anymore. They don't have a navy, and they also don't have an air force. We know that. They are not paying the soldiers' salaries. We also know that. Because there are videos circulating of soldiers and police officers in Iran saying they haven't been paid for months. And he went on to say that their inflation is now at 350%. Well, he already mentioned 250, 300. Now it's 350%. The real number is much less than that. It doesn't reach that value, okay? It doesn't reach 350%. But he added something that I want you to pay attention to because it's the serious part, in the middle of all that mocking tone from Trump. He said that the first line of leadership there is gone, it was eliminated. That the second line also disappeared, was eliminated. And that parts of the third line are also gone. And he went on to say that one of his biggest problems today is not knowing who to negotiate with, because this is the only country in the world where nobody wants to be president. It may sound like just a provocation, but that last sentence is the most serious thing he said today. And it's from that point that I want to give you the most likely explanation for this change in discourse that I mentioned at the beginning of this live. For those who missed it, guys, go back to the beginning of the live stream so you can understand what's going on, okay? To understand, you need to remember a date. February 28th. For those who forgot, it's the first day of the campaign when the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was killed, was hit and taken away. On March 8th, his son, Mustafa Khamenei, took his place in the first father-to-son succession in the history of that regime, and that's when their problem, the Iranians' problem, began. The new supreme leader was injured in the same attack that killed his father, and since then he has hardly appeared. Or actually, he never appeared. Some AI-generated images of him popped up here and there. They made him appear in some places, but he never really showed up. And his statements are released in written communiques signed by the office. Analysts who follow the regime from the inside, local analysts, describe the role of this Mustafa Khamenei. They described it like this: he's not in charge, he just rubber stamps. In other words, the ones who make the decisions are the commanders who put him there. And that's why the fight in Tehran today isn't between reformists and hardliners, as many people imagine is happening there. And that's not really the case. They are fighting among themselves. The hardliners are fighting among themselves to see who will rule Iran now that the boss is gone, dead. Everyone at that table wants the same things: to keep the regime standing, to maintain repression at home, and to keep the Revolutionary Guard in command. What they're fighting over is who has the final say, who gets the positions, and who controls the money. And the money is running out more and more. And now, just look at the public signs from the last few months. In May, the president threatened to resign if the Memorandum of Understanding with the Americans was rejected. In August, it leaked that the Supreme Leader sent a written message warning that if he tried to resign again, the resignation would be accepted. And in the most recent change in the Supreme National Security Council, the man who had voted in favor of that Memorandum of Understanding was replaced by a former commander of the Revolutionary Guard. So putting these pieces together, the interpretation I think is most likely starts to emerge. I'll mark this here as my own reading of this whole story. What's happening there isn't just a split between those who want to stop and those who want to continue. It's a dispute over who will sign the agreement. That's the truth. And especially over who will bear the blame for it. The Supreme Leader authorized that memorandum but quickly distanced himself from it in public. And this put the cost of any eventual failure on the president's shoulders. And the cornered president made or is making the obvious move. He ramps up the rhetoric on the economy and uses the people's hunger as an argument for what? To be able to close this deal quickly. That's why the three of them spoke almost at the same time and talked about the same thing. Each one is trying to fill the space that was left empty when the real leadership was eliminated in February. And this explains something that seems like an inconsistency. The same regime that calls for an end to the war through the president, Mrs. Mortadella. He said that, okay? He asked for the end of the war. He also threatens the neighbors. He's threatening the neighboring countries through the generals that same day. Because today there was a direct threat from Iran against the neighbors. This is not inconsistency. There are two groups speaking at the same time and neither of them rules Iran alone. And now a piece that also went unnoticed today, which shows what is left of their power over there. The Arab press published citing the Iranian state agency that Iran authorized the passage of some Iranian oil tankers through the strait. Take a look at this. The authorization came after repeated requests from Baghdad made through several channels, including during the visit of the Iranian parliament president to Iraq. And this news here answers the question that was left hanging for those who stayed until the end of yesterday's live stream. Do you remember that question? Yesterday I told you that Chinese refineries unable to buy directly from Iran went after oil from Iraq. Do you remember that? And from Brazil too. What was still left to explain right in yesterday's live was how this Iraqi oil was managing to get out through the strait the way it had been. And now that's the answer. It gets out because Iran opened up the Iranian side, right? This side here, look, up top, for Iraqi ships to pass through. In other words, it's no longer Iranian oil, so it can leave the strait freely. What doesn't leave from Iran can leave the strait. What doesn't go to Iran can leave the strait. What goes and leaves from there can't get past the American blockade. And that's the answer. It gets out because Iran also allowed them to pass on their side, since over there they have the range to hit any ship that passes by. Here the situation gets more difficult. And look at the size of this drop. Months ago the regime was talking about closing the passage to everyone. Do you remember that? And today they handed out authorization to their neighbor. In other words, the kind of favor you do to keep a friendship going, right guys? It's not about controlling the strait, it's about exchanging favors between neighbors. And there's another sign of pressure. This one is much uglier and showed up today. The secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council gave an interview in uniform and sent a message to the neighbors. He warned all the surrounding countries not to enter into an economic war against Iran and added that any country that does so will be treated as an enemy country. First, they negotiate to persuade, and if the other side insists, they strike that country. And on the same day, a member of the National Security Commission of the Iranian parliament said the following. He mentioned the names Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, and said that there are American fighter jets and refueling planes at the airports of those countries. He said that they have turned their own homes into fortified enemy bases, and he ended with a street-level threat, saying that later they shouldn't come complaining about the outcome. A country that is winning, my friend, doesn't threaten its neighbor because of sanctions, because that's what they are afraid of. Now suddenly everyone there started talking all the time, making statements Because of what's coming on Monday, for those who forgot. They threaten those who notice that their neighbor is lining up to jump ship. Guys, the Emirates have already done this. They've already jumped ship. And before I leave Iran, just look at the order in which things happened this week because it explains everything. On Tuesday, just remind you here because that's when all the statements from inside Iran started coming out. On Tuesday, the United Arab Emirates announced that they suspended all trade and all financial transactions with Iran until further notice. And the Emirates aren't just any neighbor in this equation. They were Iran's second largest trading partner, behind only China. That's where the regime moved money, used triangulation schemes, and kept the front company running. And 2 days later, the US Treasury Secretary announced that on Monday, tomorrow, he will announce the largest sanctions operation in history against those who do business with Iran. And then, in the next 48 hours, the president, the Speaker of Parliament, and the former Iranian president started talking about a broken economy and the need to close the deal now. This is the order. They cut off the money, set a date to tighten things even more, and their rhetoric simply changed. Mortadella, do you get that? He completely changed his rhetoric, and this time, it seems like the Americans really managed to hit a sore spot. And here, I want to point out the other side of this story, because it also exists. There are still people in there who don't care at all about this economy, who don't care about the people going hungry, and who want to keep this war going for as long as necessary. These people still exist over there, and this can still cause another wave of war in that region. As long as these people are in charge, cutting off bank accounts won't completely end this story. And from the Gulf, we now go up north, to the northern region here in Israel, because this week's diplomatic dispute had a new chapter today. Guys, I'm going to bring you the interview. In fact, I'll tell you what happened in the interview. Along with Israel's response right after. The person who spoke was the American envoy to Syria, who is also the United States ambassador to Turkey, about the Israeli attack on that airstrip in Syria. He said that Israel had intelligence information that there could be Turkish forces or military equipment at that location, and he added that the Americans know that this was not the case. He also said that Israel brought up this issue with the Americans 6 days before the attack, and according to him, the Americans checked and asked their own intelligence agencies again, the CIA, and the answer that came back was that this was not happening. In other words, that Turkey was not sending absolutely anything there. And about the Turkish reaction, he praised the other side, the Turks, and said that the Turkish army and intelligence are excellent. And he explained what happened that night. The Turks saw the Israeli planes approaching the Turkish border, they didn't know what the objective of those planes was, and they started warning that they were going to scramble their own fighter jets as well. And he said that fortunately, the more moderate elements of the army took control of the situation, and that way it was possible to defuse the tension between Israel and Turkey on that tense night. He also revealed something that almost no one knew, that every night, according to him, there is coordination between Turkey, Israel and Syria in the hunt for Islamic State terrorists. Where? Where? Because we know that wherever there is a vacuum, those people will come back and settle once again. And he concluded by saying that Israel continues to hold the Golan Heights against UN resolutions and against the position of the international order. And he made the strongest accusation of the interview, saying that Israel attacked for electoral reasons and not based on intelligence. And today, right in the middle of Shabbat, we know that during Shabbat almost no one makes any statements here in Israel. And today, in an extraordinary way, a statement was released, the Israeli response came, signed by the Minister of Defense. To this interview with Tom Barak, he gave the inside version, step by step. He started by saying that the army recommended more than once to attack that runway at that airport based on clear intelligence information about what Turkey intended to install there. And then he said that the matter was discussed several times between him, the Prime Minister, and the security establishment, and that the decision was this: before authorizing any attack, to give direct warning to the Syrian regime at the highest level to try to prevent that move. They warned them. The warning was given, and at the same time, Israeli intelligence delivered that information to the competent authorities in the United States. And only after the warning was ignored by Syria did the Prime Minister and he authorize the attack. And he ended by saying that Erdogan was caught with his hand in the cookie jar and had to back down. That's exactly how he said it, just like that. With his hand inside, he went to steal the cookie, got caught red-handed and had to back down. About the interview with the American envoy, he replied that it was full of inaccuracies and that it contradicted Trump's own position about the Golan Heights. And he also responded to the electoral accusation. He said that trying to portray that operation as political is ignorance and a lack of understanding of the country's security interests. And now here, let's get to what I think about all of this. This interview from Tom Baraki. There's one part that helps Israel and three that make things harder. What helps is the confirmation that there are talks every night between the three countries. In other words, my friend, those who talk every day are not on the path to confrontation. Do you agree that at some point they're communicating, Israel and Turkey are in contact? The first thing that makes things harder is the denial. And here, I side with Israel's version, since they have troops on that border and paid the price for any mistake. It's Israel, not the ambassador over there in Ankara. And Israeli intelligence brought the matter to the Americans 6 days before and warned the Syrian regime. At the highest level possible, which is not the behavior of someone making up an excuse. After the fact, or rather 6 days before the attack, they had already informed them that something was going on over there. There's also the position of the person who spoke. This envoy is the American ambassador to Turkey, the man whose job is to keep Ankara satisfied. The second part that gets in the way is the sentence about the moderates. He means that if things calm down on that border between Israel and Turkey, it depends on which group is in charge of the army at that moment. This isn't an alliance, this is a gamble. In other words, on the other side there are also people who want war between Israel and Turkey, and in Turkey there are others who say nothing is needed. And the third is the comment about the Golan, which seemed to come up without anyone asking, and it goes against the position of the American president himself, who recognized the Golan Heights as Israeli territory. This sentence here is aimed at someone, and that someone isn't Jerusalem, okay? It's not. And about the accusation that this is about the election, I would just add one thing here. The election here, my friends, is in October. Okay, for all the people who think we're attacking because of the elections, it has nothing to do with the elections. And honestly, if someone wants votes, do you agree with me? If this was about getting votes, whoever wants votes doesn't choose to pick a fight with the strongest army in the region 3 months before an election, right? Israel is not going to start a new war now, before the elections, just to get votes. It doesn't make any sense. While this diplomatic discussion is happening, the work on the ground hasn't stopped. In southern Lebanon, the attacks continued throughout the night and into the morning in the region. From that ridge I already told you about. Yesterday, in the Nabatea district, against Hezbollah targets, there were reports of fighter jet attacks and artillery fire in the area. And in Syria, an Israeli drone hit a vehicle in the Bedim region near Damascus. According to reports, the target was reportedly a terrorist preparing for an attack against Israeli forces on the border, that is, in the Golan Heights. The spokesperson for the Israeli army, who also mentioned another drone attack that was not confirmed to have been carried out by Israel. And so far, according to the army spokesperson, the local press also said that the details are being verified because the army, according to the report, did not confirm the attack. So apparently it wasn't Israel who carried it out. I prefer to give it to you like this, in this way, because there are two versions, okay? There is the version that says it was Israel, but the army says it wasn't. They say there were 2 drone attacks. So let's leave it at that for now. We'll find out. Maybe it was even the United States itself. Look everyone, there was also a small piece of good news today. This one coming from South America, from down there, where we know everybody, right? Colombia's president-elect decided to overturn that 2024 ban created by the previous government, which prevented the export of coal to Israel. Colombia is now selling coal to us again. It may seem like just a detail, but it's not, folks. It's another country realizing that a boycott against Israel is costly for those who do it. And now the pieces. Let's come back here once again to Iran. The pieces that show that the axis, right, the Iranian axis, is also falling apart outside of Iran, one by one. The first one is in Iraq. The Iraqi government confirmed that the final date for the disarmament of the armed militias still stands, September 30th. The armed militias are the militias that are pro-Iran, guys. Pro-Iran. Remember that, okay? Remember that. Pro-Iran militias. 6 groups are negotiating the terms with the government. 3 have already confirmed the handover. 3 groups have already confirmed that they will hand over their weapons to the government, militias that support Iran. In other words, the collapse is total, guys. And the hardliners, the ones even closer to Iran, keep refusing, saying they won't hand over the resistance weapons. Let's see what happens there on the 30th. Will the Iraqi army go to war with the Iranian militias inside the country? For those who just joined, these militias are the Iranian arm inside Iraq, and several of them have attacked American bases. When this campaign started in February, the deadline coincides with the withdrawal of the international coalition from the country. And the government warned that after that date, any weapon outside state control will become a matter for the courts. This is happening everywhere. In Lebanon, the same thing is happening. In other words, the Iranian axis has collapsed. It has collapsed. And there's the caveat. Again, deadlines on paper have been missed before many times around here, and part of this handover is just a change of badges. Do you remember that? Changing shirts, but it's still the same person. That's also happening in the Gaza Strip. But 2 years ago, no one in Baghdad would set a date to disarm these people. And today, they did. This is important. 2 years ago, it was impossible for us to imagine what's happening now. And it's exactly in this Iraq that Hamas came knocking on the door this week. A Hamas delegation led by Osama Hamdan was in Baghdad, and yesterday they met with a militia leader there. Badr, one of the most powerful figures of Iran's army in Iraq. Hamas went looking for new support where the Axis still has some kind of armed structure. Those who are doing well don't go knocking on doors looking for a sponsor. Hamas is desperate. And I'll tell you what I think about all this in my own way, as long as this kind of leader is in Doha or in Ankara, no one touches him. That's true. If this guy from Hamas were in Doha or in Ankara, it would be harder for us to hit him. Outside of there, he becomes what he always was, a high-ranking terrorist, moving around in a foreign country with no protection over him. An opportunity like this doesn't come around every week. If it were up to me, this gentleman would already have a one-way ticket to somewhere else with no return ticket. But you know, he's in the perfect spot. He's right there, just walking around. In Iraq, anything can happen. And now I owe you the last piece that came from Damascus, which wraps up this live stream. The Syrian Minister of Foreign Affairs declared today that the new Syrian government is not seeking to improve relations with Iran and set a condition for any talks. First, Tehran needs to admit the role it played in the repression against the Syrian people during the time of the previous regime of Bashar al-Assad. It's that simple. Listen carefully to what this statement implies, folks. For almost 50 years, Syria was Iran's land bridge. That's where the weapons that ended up in Lebanon passed through. That's where the bases were, and that's where the Iranian axis stood strong. And today, the Syrian foreign minister, in an interview given in Pakistan, says he doesn't want rapprochement and even demands a confession from Iran. So, take everything I've told you so far today and put it together quickly. Inside Iran, the top 3 figures in the regime asking for an end to the war. At sea, 8 out of every 10 ships passing through the side they don't control, which is Oman's side. That's what you're seeing in real time. Real time, in Iraq, a set date to disarm the Iranian militias, and in Syria, the door closed, with a humiliating condition to admit what they did there in the past. The Axis isn't being defeated in a battle, it's being dismantled piece by piece, and each part is being taken away by a different neighbor. That's what's happening. Deal with it, sleep on that. Hamas dismantled, Hezbollah dismantled. Hezbollah is getting beaten every day and can't launch a single drone. Hamas is the same, getting hit every day. And not a single rocket comes out of there, right? The regime is collapsing, and the militias from Iran and Iraq only know how to shout, talk loudly, and attack the American base that's right there, very close to them, and nothing more than that. This is the Iranian axis in total collapse. Even the Houthis, where are the Houthis? They launch missiles, launch small drones against Saudi Arabia, and that's it, guys. And this is where I finish with today's Hebrew word, and today's word is sedek. Sedek. It means crack, fissure, that split that appears on the wall, and anyone who's ever had a crack at home knows what it's like, right? At first it's really small, it's tiny, you look at it and think it's nothing serious, and then it starts to grow, and you find out that the problem isn't the wall, it's the foundation. That happened this week in Tehran. That's exactly what it was. It wasn't an opposition speech, it wasn't a street protest, and it wasn't a headline in a foreign newspaper. It was the president, it was the speaker of parliament, and the former president speaking, each in their own way. That the structure there can't take it anymore. But part of it only listens to the other side, which doesn't live there. She listens to someone who manipulated the information. And it's the guys themselves admitting that it's over. A crack in the wall, you just paint over it, my friend. A crack in the foundation, no. And I won't wrap up here without a little reminder. There are still people on the other side of the world thinking that Iran is winning this war. These are people who only pay attention to what makes noise and think it's the noise that decides everything. War. You, who have never seen a war up close or never even participated in a war. It's not just weapons in action. It's not just bombs going off, exploding everywhere. It's strategy. It's money. It's alliances. It's the neighbor who closes the bank. It's the ship that changes its route. It's the ally who switches sides. And that's what's happening on all levels at the same time. It's been going on for months. There's a phrase in the book of Proverbs that we use a lot here in Israel, which sums this up better than any analyst. בתרבולות תעשה תעשלך מלחמה. In Hebrew, okay guys, in Hebrew, in the translation that's in the Bible, in Portuguese it goes like this. With wise counsel, that's how it says, with prudent advice, you will wage your war. That word in the middle, betarbulo, that's the one that matters here. It means guidance, direction, a well thought out plan. In other words, war is fought with your head, not just with fire. And I'm still here, straight from the mountains of Judea, putting the pieces together one by one, the way the mainstream media never does for you. So hit the like button now, guys. Right now. Thank you, Eunice. Good evening, David. Good evening, friends. Good to see you here. Warrior, thank you, Julio. God bless Israel and everyone who wants it. Thank you, Hosanna. That phrase there, betarbulot tasele hamil hama. This is also used and studied in the army, guys. Just so you understand, this isn't a biblical channel, but this is actually used in the army. This is said frequently. The Prime Minister has said this several times. Not just him, but other ministers as well. Here in Israel, they've said and used this both from the right and the left. That's how it works, guys. Betarbulot tasele hamil hama. That's how you wage a war in your mind, with bombs, okay? War is fought with your head, not just with fire. And that's what's happening now. Step by step, it might work, it might not work. It might be that inside, this crack doesn't really open up, and they might somehow manage to unite. But one thing is certain. This threat that's going to happen on Monday, these new sanctions against those who do business with Iran, it hit a sore spot for those guys over there. They're really very worried about what's coming next. They're very afraid, and we can see that in the messages, in the statements on Iranian television. For those who follow, you know what I'm talking about. For those who don't, I'm bringing this to you here, in real time. This is the live broadcast right now. My friends, if anything serious happens in the Middle East, I'll be back at any moment, okay? If not, we'll meet again tomorrow. At the same time, around noon or 1 in the afternoon here in Israel. In Brazil, that's 6 or 7 in the morning. In Europe, it's practically the same time as here, about an hour earlier. Hugs to all my friends and see you on the next live.